Are you wondering what to do with all these scraps left over from quick corner projects? You could just throw all these scraps away, but I like to recycle them. In this video, I'll show you how to square up these triangle sets so you can use them in future projects. Then I'll share with you how I turn the leftover scraps from the I Spy baby blanket into this star wreath quilt. Don't worry if you don't have any scraps. I've also included directions for making these sets. Before beginning any project, make sure your fabric has been pressed. I try to keep the pairs of scraps together after I cut them off. Then I'll take 2 triangles with right sides together and run them through my machine. I'm using a 1/4 inch seam allowance to sew these 2 pieces together. Now let's say you didn't rotary cut your piece, you cut it out with scissors, so it's hard to have a straight edge to follow. Just draw a line and stitch over that line. Say that again. All you need is a straight line to follow and you'll be successful at this method. After stitching, these sets need to be pressed. I'll press the seams towards the novelty prints. I'll be cutting a 4-inch square, making sure that that diagonal line runs straight through the center. Sometimes I like to line up my piece on the 45-degree angle on my cutting board. It's not necessary, but I think it helps with keeping everything lined up. The 45-degree line on my ruler is lined up with that diagonal on my piece. First I'll trim these 2 sides, but I want to make sure that there's excess fabric past this 4-inch mark, because when I turn, I'll be trimming those 2 sides. Because there's bulk at that seam, this wants to move, so you really need to make sure that once you get it set up, that you press down firmly so it doesn't move when you go to cut. Cut away. I've flipped this around so the cut edges are lined up on these 2 lines. I'll line up my diagonal again. This time I want to make sure that that fabric does not go past that 4-inch mark. It should be nice and straight on both of those sides. Line up that 45-degree angle, press firmly, and cut. You can make some extras by cutting 4.5-inch squares, then putting the right sides together, cutting on the diagonal, and then sewing. You'll end up with 2 squares that can be cut down or squared up to put into your quilt. To make this wreath of stars, I'll need 32 of these 4-inch triangle squares, or the star points. For the star centers, I'll need to cut 8 4-inch squares of fabric, and then to fill in this background, I'll need to cut 41 4-inch squares. I'll use this pattern to help me lay out all of my pieces. I moved my squares around until I found an arrangement that I liked, and then I took a photo for reference. I'll sew each row using 1/4-inch seams. It's easy to get these squares mixed up, so after putting right sides together, I always hold the side that needs to be sewn in my right hand. I take it over to my sewing machine and put it next to the needle. I know that the edge near the needle is the edge that I'll sew. I like to stack these up and then chain stitch them together. I sewed all the squares together in each row, and then I pressed the seams. In this row I pressed in this direction. In the next row I'll press in the opposite direction and continue pressing in opposite directions throughout the quilt. When the seams are pressed in this manner in opposite directions, it helps when I go to match those intersections. The bulk of the seam on this piece is here. The bulk of the seam on this piece is on this side. When I put right sides together, they'll nestle in against each other, and then I'll pin. In some of these intersections, you'll find triangle tips. At this intersection, there are 2 triangle tips that need to be matched. The pressing will help line up these seams, but you also have to work on matching these 2 tips. There's many ways to do this, but I find that just using a regular glue stick like this. It's washable, of course. Putting a little dab of glue there, and then checking to make sure that both of those tips match, and then pressing. I think beginners have the most success with this method. After I sewed all the rows together, I pressed the seams in one direction, and here's my completed top. If you want to make it larger, you can add borders till you reach the size you desire. In this border, I added some 2-inch strips and then 18 more 4-inch squares. I machine quilted the layers together, starting with a circle in the center and then echoing this. Here's my completed project. If you would like a free copy of these directions, please email me at learnquilting@gmail.com. Thank you for visiting learnhowtoquilt.com. Please share our videos with your friends.